The Aquaponics Mission 21 program is being offered to kids in all over Southern Colorado at Boys and Girls Clubs, and each kid gets their own aquaponics tank. We've set them up. We're doing experiments. We're planting peas, and we're going to do a lot of other different seeds to germinate and see how the fish and the bacteria keep the system going. So I'm going to turn it over to you, and you can tell us about your work as a plant scientist at NASA.
Okay, well, thank you, Susan, and thank you all for being here today. If it's okay, I would like screen sharing, and I'll share some slides with you. But first, I just want to introduce myself a little bit. So I got really interested in this when I was actually growing up in Florida, in Central Florida. And in 7th grade, so when I was 12 years old, my agriculture teacher came to Kennedy Space Center and learned about the research going on with plants in space. And that set me on my lifelong journey. So you guys now could get inspired to do whatever you want to do for the rest of your lives. And you just never know until you find that thing that inspires you. And so after I learned about that, I worked with my teacher to build some hydroponic systems in middle school and high school. He actually got really inspired by the work that was going on at NASA about aquaculture and fish farming. And he started a whole program at the middle school on aquaculture. So he was also very inspired by this experience. And I went on to college and graduate school. I studied abroad, but I always kept the idea that I wanted to grow plants in space. And so after working on a NASA-related project at Purdue University, looking at LED lighting and plant growth, I had an opportunity to come to Kennedy Space Center as a postdoctoral researcher, which just means somebody with a lot of education. And I came and I worked on feeding the astronauts. So I'll tell you a bit about that. But first, why we want to grow plants in space? You know, that's the big question. Why are we even doing this? And so you see here, this is astronaut Mike Hopkins, and he's showing you a meal on the International Space Station. And it's just not any meal. This is actually Thanksgiving dinner. So this is the fancy meal on the space station. And what you see is all the food is individually packaged, and a lot of it's freeze dried. You add water, you can add warm water or cold water. They have a little bit of a thing that they can heat up the food in, and that's pretty much it. And it's actually really good food. There's about 180 different types of food. And it's all very tasty. But if you were to store that food, the taste, the quality, and the texture, and also the nutrition, the vitamins, degrades over time. And that's a really big concern, because when we go to Mars, we may have to store the food for a long time. We might have to send the food to Mars before the astronauts even leave Earth. So we're looking at ways to grow plants to supplement that diet and to provide all the vitamins that astronauts need, and also to provide some variety and enjoyment of the food. Growing plants, as you all know, just like growing fish or taking care of animals or gardening, can provide some psychological well-being. And that's going to be really important for these astronauts too, because they're living and working away from Earth. You know, they may not see Earth out the window when they're on their way to Mars, which they do on the space station now, but they don't have all of the things that we depend on. And plants also recycle the atmosphere. You know, they take up the carbon dioxide that we breathe out, and they give off oxygen that we need to breathe. They also help to recycle the water. So plants have a lot of benefits. And so we're working on the International Space Station, which is our orbiting laboratory. And we have 7 people up there right now living and working and doing science and playing with their food in space. And this is a really wonderful place, because this is where we can test technologies that we need for the future of exploration. so that we can go to the moon and we can go on to Mars. We can test them here because they're not very far away in low Earth orbit, and they have this big, beautiful space station to sustain them, so they don't have to depend on a very small spacecraft like they will in the future. And one of the things we're testing is the Veggie Chamber. So this is a picture of the Veggie Chamber. You can see it here with the pink lights. It's actually red, blue, and green lights, and so they just look pink. And it's a small plant growth chamber with these flexible accordion-like walls that you can see through, and with lights and with fans to move the air through the plants. And this is what the space station looks like. You can see around it all the cables and wires and plastic and metal panels. So it's a very synthetic environment. It feels very, unnatural, right? So you can imagine if you live there, what having something green and growing might make you feel when you're surrounded by all of this, mechanical stuff. It could be really, really nice to have something green and growing. And the astronauts agree. So this is astronaut Shane Kimbrough, and he's harvesting lettuce. And that's a red romaine lettuce that we grew on the space station, where he was able to harvest multiple times. We call that cut and come again. So you can harvest multiple times. And he's got a pretty big smile on his face. So lettuce is one of the crops that we've grown, and we've grown some other crops as well. Recently, we grew red Russian kale, dragoon lettuce, another kind of a green lettuce, wasabi mustard. This one's spicy, and it's got a lot of good flavor, extra dwarf pak choi. And then Amara mustard. We're actually growing those two right now, the extra dwarf pak choi and the Amara mustard. This one's called steak plant by our team here because it's got a really meaty type of a flavor. So we're growing these in different combinations. And like I said, we're growing the Amara mustard and the extra dwarf pak choi right now on the space station in 2 different veggie units. And these two, the dragoon lettuce and the extra dwarf pak choi, those were crops selected by students, middle school students and high school students in a program called Growing Beyond Earth, where students have chambers in their classroom and are helping us to identify which plants might be good candidates. So just a couple more great photos. Here you can see some of the astronauts eating the crops. They get all the different food items out on their dining table to eat with the crops to try to make interesting new combinations. And we get to hear about the recipes that they come up with. In the bottom, you can see this astronaut, he's actually watering the plants. He's got a water bag and a tube that goes to the plants. And here you see both veggie units, up one above and one below, because we sent a second one a couple years later. And here you can see Jessica and Christina. They're harvesting and watering some of these plants. And this is the crew that's on there right now. That's Shannon and Mike, and they're harvesting some of the plants and smelling them because they smell really good. So I'll just end with some photos of our team at Kennedy Space Center, all the people who are helping to make this research work. We got a really great group, and maybe someday that will include some of you. We'd love to have you there as NASA interns.